Hello and welcome to this video on 4 Sebsongs Eurorack modules. We'll be exploring Euclidean and Odds, but we'll be passively using the Attenuvert 6 and the stereo mixer here. Let's check out what's to come in the video. So up front, I'd like to thank Fonk for sponsoring this demo video. Odds is a 4 HP pattern generator. It gives us probability-based gates, random sequencing, and quantized to different scale and chord tones volt per octave CV outs. Euclidean is a 3-channel but 4-output Euclidean sequencer where we have simple controls and a nice display for quick and fun beat making. Attenuvert 6 is 6 attenuverters cram-packed into 6 HP, and it's great for those moments where you want to kind of set and forget lots of modulation in a system. And the ST mixer or stereo mixer is a 4-channel mixer, 3 of which have level and pan with mono inputs. We have a stereo input with a level control, and an output labelled phones with a volume control, and that's a stereo mini jack. Now you can simply use a splitter, which is what I'm doing, to record or patch your left and right back around a system or drive a pair of headphones. This video is made up of 3 parts, one focusing on Odds, another focusing on Euclidean, and a couple of patches at the end where we use them together for things like using probability-based accents on top of Euclidean rhythms. All of that's on screen if you'd like to skip around, but the timing index is below, so let's get into it. So let's start with Odds. It's 4 HP, 2 input, 2 output pattern generator. We input a trigger to advance through the steps within this sequence, and this can be a regular clock or it can be something erratic, Euclidean, random, ratcheting. It will simply move forward through its pattern with a trigger, whether it's a steady one or not. We have a volt per octave input, which is actually for transposition. We can transpose through different tones here, and it transposes within the circle of fifths, which is something we'll explore in a later patch. We have a gate output, and the CV output is our quantized pitch information for your oscillators. The controls have a black left-hand default setting, which is the percentage, which is a probability that a gate will fire and a new note will happen. We have a scale for selecting which scale we're operating within, and all of those are currently on screen. And we have a step control, which works when we hit this loop button, which is latching. We can see the LED to show us we're in or out of loop mode, and we can move through the steps within that loop. Again, information is on screen. We then have a secondary set of functions, which is a non-bold font in brackets, which uses a momentary shift button. The top knob then becomes control of the octave that we're operating within. The second kind of scales back that scale tone from being a full scale that we've selected down through various chord tones if you'd like to hang around within a smaller subset of notes within the scale you've selected. And then we have, again, holding the momentary for shift, we have the offset control, so we could select a loop of say 3 or 4 steps and then shift through and offset through groups of 3 or 4 steps within the loop that we have. So let's explore this with some patches. So here we'll take a quick look at generating patterns with Odds, a kind of getting started if you like. I'm removing the outputs here, and this green trace here and this purple cable is a clock. I'm clocking the trigger input, and let's output a gate here from the gate on Odds. Now in terms of me starting to build a pattern and a sequence, I'm going to play around with probability, which will play less notes, less frequently, or play notes more frequently when there's more probability. I don't want a constant steady clock though, so I'm going to find a pattern that kind of just works for me here. And then simply plugging in CV will start to generate CV, which we'll see in the yellow trace on data, and it will start to volt per octave sequence my oscillator. I can move the scale that this works within, and by holding shift I can change the chord tone that this operates within. If I like to hold shift, go all the way around on the chords, it's playing the full potential scale, and then use the scale to find a key and tone for the pitch sequence that I like. I can then hit loop, and steps will define how many steps of this looping pattern are playing. So here we'll explore the steps and offset control right here on Odds. Yellow trace is my clock coming into the trigger, green trace is the gate out, which is striking a low pass gate, and the blue trace there and blue cable is my volt per octave signal I'm using for pitch. It's playing a modulated patch with some reverb going on. Now the steps control will take this loop, and I'm going to leave this loop so you can see what's going on. We'll change the amount of steps in the loop. So you can hear we had a much bigger, larger loop captured there than that lower step count would suggest. Now if I hold shift, this becomes an offset control and it will shift through this locked loop of information. Same amount of steps. But we're shifting through this locked pattern of information. And you simply hold shift down. It's just great fun for creating melodies and patterns. So here we're exploring this volt per octave input for transposing odds. And without it, have a nice major chord, just random pattern moving around with a modulated patch and some effects. But by using this sequence, which just plays one step forward every 16 steps, by using a Euclidean pattern to clock it, so effectively once per bar this will move down a step on this sequencer. Now this transposes in a circle of fifths, so if this was say on a note C, it would go up a fifth to G, up a fifth to D, up another fifth to A, to E, to B, and so on. It's a musical tool that you can use, and a nice way of musically implementing some transposition there on that volt per octave input. Again, in terms of performing with odds, we could loop this, find these nice little patterns, come back out, and then this will start to transpose as this randomly creates patterns again. So here we're using odds for a slower, ambient, generative leaning patch. The green trace here is a slow clock that's coming into the trigger. The yellow trace is my gate output. I'm transposing with this sequencer, bringing it a slower clock than the one coming into odds, as we've seen in the transposition patch in this video. And the blue trace is my pitch, which is controlling my oscillator. I'm simply using it as a random, quantized, musical, random sequence. Now I've got quite a lot of dense and busy effects in this sound, so dropping the probability back slightly and just letting some of these effects hang where notes don't play works particularly musically. It just gives some breathing space within the patch. And if you're a Patreon supporter, there's a full patch rundown for everything that's going on in this patch. You can find that on my Patreon page, link in the description. So Euclidean is an 8 HP, 4 output, 3 channel Euclidean rhythm generator. This will run on its own 120 BPM clock internally until we trigger or clock that externally. And we have a reset and an external reset too. And we have the basic controls for Euclidean rhythms, which are the length of the sequence, the density, the amount of active steps in the rhythm, and being able to offset a rhythm within that pattern as well. The 3 channels and 3 outputs all operate the same way, except channel 1 has an off 1, and this is an offbeat or off step or inactive step output. So if you just had 1 step out of, say, 10 active on the first channel there, the other 9 steps that weren't active would all appear on the offbeat. We select a channel by clicking the encoder for channels 1, 2 and 3, and the dot matrix display there shows us the pattern at the top, and then the sequence, the playhead of that sequence. If I hit channel 1 and say change its length, you'll start to see this doesn't move together. These are independent playheads that are moving around. So we can select length up to 16 steps, which is shown visibly on those top 2 rows. We can select the density of pattern, how many active steps there are between 1 to 16. And then we can use offset to shift the pattern around within those given steps that are active. Hitting another channel will do the same thing there. So let's get into making some Euclidean beats. The kick drum and the hi-hat that you're hearing are completely external to Euclidean here, just giving us this kick and offbeat hat as a basis for the beat. Now output 1 here is this first yellow cable, green trace on data, and I'm going to use that to play an open hi-hat sound. Now selecting the channels, moving through these buttons here, we can see that indicated which one we've last selected. Let's select channel 1 and add some density, add some beats into this rhythm. Now I'm happy with that pattern. The offbeat, all the off steps, which is a complete opposite of the rhythm on channel 1 there, will play in between these hi-hats. And we can see that there on data, and we'll hear that. All 16th notes are full between the output and the offbeat there. If I remove this hi-hat, there's gaps in this rhythm where this open hi-hat is playing. Let's get a little snare sound onto channel 2 here. Select channel 2. See how that plays against this hi-hat. The offbeat back in. Nice dense rhythm building up. And finally, let's add the third output, which is this kind of tom into reverb-like sound. And I just want that to hit once per bar, so I can select channel 3 and offset that rhythm from beat 1, say to the and of beat 2 there. So here we're going to use Euclidean to create polymetric pattern. And a polymetric pattern, or a set of polymetric patterns, if you like, is a series of patterns that play over each other with different step lengths. Now there's one Euclidean hit, one single beat at the start of the bar here, and they're all set to 16 steps, all 3 outputs, which are triggering 3 different percussion sounds. If I remove these briefly, here's my backing, a kick drum on beat 1 and a hi-hat just coming from Pamela's workout there. So if I start changing the step lengths, we'll start to hear this polymetrically start developing. With the first pattern, I'm going to select it and go down to every 3 steps. Second pattern, let's maybe go for 5. Third pattern, let's go for 7. Now this is playing polymetrically, different step lengths all playing over each other, and you can see those playheads moving. It's a bit of a messy example, so let's clean this up a little bit. Second output there, let's make this a bit of a longer pattern. Now you don't have to do this with just a single hit at the start of the bar. If I go back to channel 1 there, and just listen to channel 1 against the kick and hi-hat, I can still add more beats. So you could have 2 beats in, let's say, the space of 5. Or 3 beats in the space of 5. On the second output, I'm going to leave that as it is. Third output there, Let's make this 2 beats. That's just a quick example of setting up polymetric beats. Let's hear it against a more musical beat, rather than this just kind of slow, slightly strange example that I've given here. So here's a patch just to get us going with Euclidean, really just to say all hail Euclid. Euclid rhythms are great, and all this is running off the Euclidean here. Nice filthy kick sound. And interesting rhythms just emerge from these Euclidean patterns. Now the second output here is this hi-hat. And using the offset, I've been able to set up a quarter note, but then offset it, get my typical offbeat hi-hat type pattern there. The off output is coming in handy here, as all the rhythms in between the kicks, the inverted version or the rhythms that aren't hitting, do hit on the offbeat hi-hat. I'm playing this random set of samples just being kind of choked down in a low pass gate. Plays against this kick really nicely. It's just kind of a rhythm poking through, filling those gaps. The third output is an additional percussion sound. And it all just comes together. So here's just a quick patch to say that you don't have to use Euclidean rhythms for drums. Here, all 3 outputs from Euclidean are triggering envelopes. Euclidean is being clocked slowly, and I'm using Euclidean patterns to decide when these envelopes coming in out, giving me what would be quite a nice rhythmic pattern, but slowed down and triggering envelopes to modulate sounds, rather than actually triggering the sound themselves. So here we're going to look at pairing odds with Euclidean to turn odds into an accent generator for Euclidean patterns. Now this is going to work on the hi-hats in this beat, there's some distortion and some effects going on. So here's my basic hi-hat pattern. It's here on data, and then I'm chaining this rhythm to play my hi-hats, but also to play another percussion sound, but the trigger that before it hits the percussion sound goes to odds. And I'm simply using the probability control to carve out this rhythm. If I make the decay longer, this may be really obvious. I'm using an accent here by just simply adding another sound on top. Similar sounds that work like accenting patterns with 2 hi-hat sounds playing off of each other. And as it's all based around this third output on Euclidean here, changes to the pattern will also change this idea of this accenting layer on top. And I can have very few of them, or very many of them. And this plays really nicely against the beat where you're layering sounds to create accents and different levels and dynamics. You can hear it bouncing around quite nicely against that kick and snare there. So here we're using Euclidean to drive more rhythmically interesting and dynamic patches, rather than just using a sequence to create a pattern where each clock pulse is a pitch change. There's 3 rhythms going on. The first is my note generation, which triggers an envelope and a VCA to let my sound through. The second is pitch changes here in odds, which is my pitch sequencer and pattern generator. And the third creates modulation changes, tonal changes and accents within this patch. So let's strip this back and hear these rhythms one by one. So here's the first output, which triggers my envelope and opens my VCA. If I make that play all notes, we've got a typical kind of clock just moving around, but we can be more interesting with Euclidean rhythms here. With this playing all 16 notes in a 16-step pattern, let's add back in these pitch changes from the second output. And by driving odds with a Euclidean rhythm that isn't just a steady clock, I've ended up with a pattern that evolves and changes on a kind of rhythmic basis rather than just every single step, every single pulse of the tempo. I can of course make channel 2 play all 16th notes here. And this is more like a typical one clock step, one pitch change, basic kind of sequencer situation. I'll change how dense this rhythm is for playing less steps and listen to how the pitch changes. I like the sound of that pattern there, 5 steps, 5 Euclidean steps. I'm going to go back to channel 1 and get the rhythm that I had before that I quite liked. So this is this decoupled rhythmic sequencing, decoupling the gate generation for the envelope and VCA to the pitch to create interesting changes rhythmically. And the third output here, which is currently playing 3 steps in this 16-step pattern, is changing modulation in the patch. It's changing tones on my oscillator. You could hear it when I touch that cable, and it's also changing the filter's resonance and cutoff too. If I select channel 3 and make this say just 1 step at the start of the bar, you can hear that first note. If it plays all the steps, a bit too full on here, but we can find a nice Euclidean rhythm. So 3 different rhythms, one to generate notes with an envelope and VCA, one for pitch change and one for modulation change, and it's led to a different and more interesting sequence than I might approach by basically using a normal sequencer. So thanks for watching this video on Euclidean, odds, and featuring that kind of little side B-side of Attenuvert x6 and the ST mixer there as well. If you'd like to check out these modules, links are in the description. You can get that extra ambient patch rundown if you're a Patreon supporter, which again is linked in the description, and that's on screen too. You'll gain access to patch books, exclusive videos, my Discord community, and a whole load more by becoming a supporter. Thanks for watching, hit like and subscribe, leave a comment, I'd love to chat down there, and I'll see you next time. Bye.